Well, Joe Brady was one of Penn State's preferred candidates on this head coaching search, but now LSU's in the mix, and they want him too.
You are Locked On College Crossover, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. Download the app today. That is right. It is a Locked On crossover to talk Penn State and LSU footballs. Now, they are both on the market for a new head coach, and there are some mutual candidates that they are targeting. My name is Zach Seyko, and I'm the host of Locked On Nittany Lions, your daily source for all things Penn State. He is Matt Moscona, your host of Locked On LSU, for all things covering everything daily when it comes to LSU. And we're going to talk, compare and contrast LSU versus Penn State. Who's the better job? Which candidates are going to prefer LSU or Penn State? I say to each their own, but it's a little more complex than that. James Franklin, former Penn State head coach, could be a top candidate for LSU, but Penn State and LSU are battling for the likes of Joe Brady, potentially Jeff Brohm. Where things ultimately stand here, Matt, you're very well plugged into all of this right out of the gate, understanding the situation, and you'll probably know some connections here as far as how people think and feel about Penn State. So who is that priority target for LSU, and is that the better destination? So for Joe Brady, is he going to say LSU over Penn State, or where do things kind of stand right now as they get into the party here with Penn State?
So the trickiest part about the LSU opening is the uncertainty as to who is going to make this hire. LSU has an athletic director in Scott Woodward. However, LSU is in the process right now, and within the next couple of weeks, it's expected that they're going to hire a new university president. And that's a hire that the governor of this state is going to have a lot of influence over. And it has been made clear to me with very little uncertainty that one of the first directives the new president is going to have from the governor is to replace Scott Woodward. So will they have a new athletic director in place in time to make this hire? Or will the athletic director inherit a situation where a hire has been made? It's fascinating, man. You have a GM in place, Austin Thomas. You have an associate AD, Verge Osbury, who's been a long-time LSU associate, who played football at LSU, who will yield a lot of influence here as well, wield a lot of influence. And then does the governor get involved in this hire? That's the really tricky part, Zach. Like, Scott Woodward has this reputation from his time at Washington, where he hired Chris Peterson, at Texas A&M, where he hired Jimbo Fisher, at LSU, where he hired Brian Kelly, where he is a guy that goes big game hunting. He's going to spend $100 million and hire the biggest name he could find. But if he's not making this hire, then it becomes a little more ambiguous.
No, and that's really understandable, right? Penn State, the benefit that they have going for them is that they made this decision earlier, but it doesn't even seem like LSU can play catch up to an extent, right? That they're now getting into the mix because it's at Penn State, and then there's Florida. Florida's going to be courting the same candidates as well. And that's the point that I've tried to make here about Penn State, is that, they're kind of all alone and who knows if Steve Sarkisian, the rumors linking him to the NFL, right? All those, it was so much simpler for Penn State, but now it's much more complex.
Yeah.
Especially if LSU gets to a point where they're targeting. So if it comes down, hey, Penn State really wants Joe Brady, but Joe Brady had a lot more success. Hey, connected to both universities for different reasons. One is an analyst, one winning a national title when it came to that. And then as I see the hot boards continue to update, Jeff Brohm of Louisville, or a Brent Key over at Georgia Tech. So, and then we'll talk about James Franklin. I know Lane Kiffin. He could say no to Florida. Could he say no to LSU? So I know there's extracurricular points for LSU to make a head coaching hire, but I think where Penn State is, they don't want LSU and Florida to kind of continue to chip away at some other perceived leads if they had that preferred candidate.
Yeah, and I wonder if they are searching and going. Sorry, my little boy just walked in here. So this is dad life, man. You can't make it up. I don't know. I'll be interested to see if Penn State and LSU actually are targeting the same candidates. The first name you hear down here has been Lane Kiffin. And I understand why people are interested in Lane Kiffin with the SEC experience, with the fact that he beat LSU this year, and he really seems to have matured. The question you have, though, Zach, and I think this is really going to manage a lot of this entire search for whoever is looking, whoever is hiring, is the college football playoff. Because if Ole Miss makes the college football playoff, if there's been talking about Dan Lanning, for example, like, do you take your swing at Dan Lanning? If Oregon's in the college football playoff, how in the world do you navigate that when those teams are going to be playing for a national championship through December and possibly January, when you go to the December portal window, and now the January or the December high school signing period and the January portal window? I don't know that you can wait to make that hire. And what if they tell you no? So it feels like some of those candidates that feel like they're the primary targets on playoff contenders right now might remove themselves from consideration just because their teams keep winning.
And that's when there was interest, or at least there's rumors. Hey, Kalen DeBoer, is everything great at Alabama? They're winning, but is everything great as it's perceived to be? Because he's been linked to the Penn State job. Mike Elko, because of his connections with New Jersey, graduating from the University of Pennsylvania, would make a ton of sense. And is honestly, no logistics aside, who's the top candidate purely? I would say it's Mike Elko when it comes to what decision would best benefit Penn State. So again, with all that being said, there's a lot of nuances and logistics in both of these coaching searches, with where LSU is, where Penn State is, where some of these other teams are. Are you going to sacrifice and set up a coach, not necessarily for failure, but set them up with an uphill battle right out of the gate, where fans want to win now? They want to win ASAP. That's why LSU and Penn State made these decisions in the middle of the season, because they expect results way sooner rather than later. And you're going to be hurting a little bit, given the portal and given high school recruiting, as you mentioned, if you try to wait and then you don't even get Dan Lanning or Elko or DeBoer.
Do you think Elko would leave Texas A&M?
For the right price? I know that it's going to be difficult to get him away from, or that Texas A&M is ready to go to war to outbid anybody that would make that. But again, Elko,
that would be stunning. Because they're going to make the college football playoff.
Yeah.
They're in. When you look at their remaining schedule, even they have two road games at Missouri, at Texas. Even if they lost those two, they're going 10-2 and they're in the playoff. It's so hard for me to imagine making the college football playoff with all of the resources you have in College Station and then leaving. Is that the top of the Penn State wish list? Is Mike Elko?
For me personally, he's up there. I would say that the perfect hires, so to speak, are Kalen DeBoer, Mike Elko. Again, all of it aside, I know timing's everything in this. I'm not saying, I'm going to be so surprised if they don't get Mike Elko and that Penn State should be able. No, I get this. I get this totally. But Mike Elko, for me personally, I think is just the best pure speculative candidate. And then you go to Kalen DeBoer, and then there's Jeff Brohm, there's Brent Key, I think Bob Chesney's intriguing. I've been talking a lot about Brian Hartline, but when we're talking Penn State and LSU crossing over in this crossover episode, Hartline's a legit candidate for Penn State, but I don't see him popping up anywhere for LSU, and they're not going to go that route.
Yeah, I'll tell you, if you're looking at the sort of short list or the wish list, there's there's the pipe dream of, can you get Nick Saban to come back and coach for 3 years, which, let's be real, he's not leaving College Game Day. Then there's the Kiffin Lanning, do you take your swing, make them say no? I'd get that, but let's be real, both of those likely aren't going to happen. When you start to get to the more, what feel, Zach, like more realistic candidates, it's like Eli Drinkwitz, Dan Mullen, Jed Fish. Like, those are the sort of names you start to hear. And then it's, and in that mix, it's, do you look in the NFL for Joe Brady? And another guy that's sort of been mentioned around here is Kelvin Shepherd, who played at LSU and is the DC for the Lions. But what's fascinating about it, Zach, it's like, it's just such a different era in college football where you wonder, these legacy coaches, look at Brian Kelly's a great example of it. Yeah, like Mike Gundy, like Saban, these guys, Dabo, that have really struggled to transition in this era. And it makes you think like someone with an NFL background, that NFL model, who can trust the GM to build the roster and they coach the team, like that may be a better suited path and a more realistic one.
Well, as we continue this conversation, that's only one part of it. LSU, if they don't get their preferred candidate, do they pivot and go to James Franklin, who oddly enough is highly rated by the odds makers, putting him 4th on that list? We're going to talk about Penn State, being fired by Penn State and then being hired by LSU. Well, that would be quite the transition for Franklin. We'll discuss it here next on this Locked On Crossover. And this crossover episode is brought to you by FanDuel. The NBA is back, and there's no better place to get in on the action than FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Even if you miss the start of the game or you want to ride the hot hand, FanDuel has live bets on everything from who will score next to fourth quarter comebacks. Plus, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay for a shot at a bigger payout. It keeps every game exciting, especially when your team's making that late push. And right now, FanDuel is giving new customers $300 in bonus bets. That's right, $300 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. And those bonus bets can be used on anything: NBA, baseball in the postseason, NFL, college football. Penn State lines are available for the Penn State-Ohio State game. Ohio State is a heavy favorite, 20.5 points on the spread, minus 1,800 on the money line, plus 920 if you're thinking Penn State. The total is set at 43.5. If you like those lines, you can go over to FanDuel.com or the FanDuel app and get in on the action. Head over to FanDuel.com to sign up and play your game with FanDuel. Remember, new customers can get $300 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. That is FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. James Franklin is not necessarily Lane Kiffin. We addressed it. Lane Kiffin, Joe Brady, a lot of those names make sense. But now this is why I never thought I'd be doing a crossover episode with Locked On LSU in the middle of the season. This was the furthest thing on my bingo card. But I'm grateful to have this.
Maybe both of us thought we would have been doing a playoff Locked On crossover the way the season started. But here we are with both of our schools having fired their coach.
Exactly. And go figure, it could be a situation where we might even have a follow-up conversation if it gets to that point where it's a possibility. I'm not saying it's likely, but James Franklin is going to draw interest from LSU. Now, I'm hearing steam from Virginia Tech that this is really in the works. So we'll see. This is a very fluid situation. But what is LSU's perspective on James Franklin? Because here's the thing that I've said about Franklin consistently since being fired by Penn State is that he believes he belongs in the Big Ten and the SEC. I don't know if he sees himself as an ACC head coach because he still thinks that he can win a national title and belongs at a top level. That's the key word, belongs at a top level school. Yeah.
He had the job he did at Vanderbilt was one of the most impressive coaching jobs. Keep in mind, like what Clark Lee's doing now is amazing, but like we talked about, it's a different era, man, where you can go in the portal. And I think the way that Clark Lee's built that thing has been remarkable. I mean, he's got a plan, a system. He's recruiting 24, 25-year-old guys out of JUCO and Division II in the FCS and getting really experienced veteran college football players that are bought into their system. Yeah. Franklin did it at a time where you didn't have NIL. You didn't have the transfer portal. And he was able to build as successful a program as Vanderbilt had in their history, certainly in the previous 80 years. But I'll tell you, man, I don't mean to douse water on the fire here, but I haven't heard not a single person, not an admin, not a booster, not a board member, not anyone with any influence at LSU mention James Franklin's name. And I think that's part and parcel with the reputation he's gained at Penn State over the last 12 years, which is big game James. Whether it's right or wrong, I mean, you know that program way better than I do. Yeah. But you can have perspective on that that's far better than mine, watching it day in and day out. But it's similar, like when I look at Brian Kelly, the national perception of Kelly is that he's a gigantic jerk and people hate him. Like, that's not true. Brian Kelly was super pleasant and professional and had tons of courteous and levels of respect. professionally. He was very well liked by the media. He just didn't win enough, man. And when you don't win enough, then people point out your warts. So I don't know if it's all to say. I don't know if it's fair with Franklin and that reputation. I mean, I guess your record to a degree is what it is. There's context and nuance with everything, but I saw the same odds that you did, but there's not a soul, not a single person. And I mean, I talk to people on the booster list that are like single digits on the booster list. You know what I mean? Like if you're ranking them by contribution, like single digits on the booster list, and nobody has mentioned James Franklin. So I could see him landing a major job, and I think he will. Like I think there's a really good chance he could land at Florida. But man, I would be stunned if he ended up being the guy at LSU.
And that was what came to my mind when I said we're going to have this episode. There's a lot of overlap between James Franklin and Brian Kelly, because I kind of got the outside perception as well. Because when I look at social media, players are saying, I don't care what you think about Brian Kelly. He's done so much for me. And the same thing goes for 99% of people that James Franklin has either worked with or coached. They will go to bat for him. And that's why he stayed in Penn State for a long time, aside from, strategic contract negotiations. But from the outsider, that people seem like they have an axe to grind. They really don't like him. And they point out those flaws, and he's egotistical and he's that. There are some criticisms that I have as well, but I think Brian Kelly and James Franklin are very similar coaches. So the same thing that I've said about Penn State in this coaching search, where you don't fire James Franklin in the middle of the season to go with Matt Rhule or Manny Diaz, who literally coached beneath James Franklin. You go with somebody that offers you more potential, more upside. So Brian Kelly, you'd be hiring James Franklin in theory. What would that change for LSU? Probably nothing. What's
so fascinating, man? Like how coaching searches go. And this is my 19th season covering LSU, and so I've been through 3 coaching searches. I covered the bulk of Les Miles' era. He was in year 3 whenever I started on the beat. I was in news before I did sports. And then of course Orgeron and Kelly. But the fascinating thing is, like, when they fired Les Miles, remember Les was like James Franklin. He was a dozen years into his time at LSU. He won a national title. He had won 2 SEC titles. Like he's a college football Hall of Fame resume. And they fired him in the middle of the season. And the thought was just that. It was like, you don't fire a national championship winning coach to promote the interim. But that's exactly what they ended up doing with Ed Orgeron. And it's weird because, like, I've just become conditioned in doing this so much in so many sports to know, like, my mantra, Zach, is believe nothing, consider everything. And, I hear you when you say, like, you didn't fire James Franklin and pay that big buyout to just hire down. But so much of that circumstantially is dictated to you by what the hiring cycle looks like in that given year. And so you do the best you can. So I think the way a lot of athletic directors look at it is to say, all right, like, it's not so much, are we firing this candidate because there's a better option readily available that we already have? It's to say, if we proceed with our current coach, do we have a chance of improving? If the answer is no, then you have to choose a different direction. And again, some of those circumstances are, those variables you don't control. So, I think, look, Florida, LSU, Penn State, these are all really good jobs, man.
Yeah.
I mean, that there are coaches that will crawl over broken glass to get to these places. Mm-hmm. But it may not be the guy look at your active coaches that have won national championships. Like, Kirby's not leaving. Does anybody really want Dabo right now? Ryan Day's not leaving Ohio State. So, like, it was interesting to hear you say you don't fire James Franklin for Matt Rhule. Like, if you put them both on a wall and said pick one, I would pick Matt Rhule over James Franklin. I don't know. I guess it's just interesting perspective.
No, and that's why we have these kinds of conversations. And it's I'm in my bubble, right? Because a lot of vocal Penn State fans, I won't even say it's the majority. I'm okay with the Matt Rhule hire. I just don't know why my logical conclusion is, why do you make this decision
Yeah.
to blow everything up in the middle of the season to have that underwhelming hire with Matt Rhule? Because that's what, speaking to fans or just speaking to other fellow commentators, they say it's like, does it move the needle is the question. But I get what you're saying, that it's a different direction. It certainly would be, because Matt Rhule is a legacy, and it returns to vintage Penn State, so to speak, since he played under Joe Paterno. He's a Paterno guy. Would it get Penn State back to the Paterno days? I guess that's appealing to some people, but you don't hear them outspoken quite a bit.
That's interesting, man. So, are we in agreement here that the crossover mostly would be over Joe Brady? If Franklin, I don't think is really a candidate at LSU. And not say he would never be. I just haven't heard that name. Is Brady the one that Penn State fans would be really excited over? Because I have heard that, look, there is a growing number, and I'm not talking about fans, I'm talking about like the people that write checks and hire and fire people that would endorse Joe Brady coming down from Buffalo.
Yeah, well, let's be honest about it. I don't know the exact logistics of it, but I know that there is financial influence, and I'll name Terry Pagula, who, owns Buffalo Professional Sports.
Sure.
He supports Penn State athletics. That's not the only reason. Joe Brady's an intriguing candidate. It's something different. He was an analyst at Penn State once upon a time.
Yeah.
And he has the NFL experience.
But he has a great relationship with Joe Moorhead. I mean, a lot of those concepts are what he brought to LSU in 2019.
Yeah. So Joe Brady taking over as a head coach, he doesn't have the head coaching experience. My thing is, does he want to be back in college? Is there always going to be he's been linked to the Tennessee Titans job. He would prefer being a head coach at Tennessee than a college coach at Penn State or LSU.
That's the fascinating thing, right? Like, so I was told, pro contracts like that aren't necessarily public record, but I don't mind sharing this because I got this from someone in the agent world who I trust implicitly, who told me that Joe Brady currently is making $1.8 million with the Bills. And whether that's a dead on accurate number, but let's call it close. If you're making 1.8, you come to college at an LSU or Penn State, make $5-7 million, which is a relative discount compared to what you were just paying your coach. But it's a massive raise for someone like Brady. Now, you're taking a risk on a first-time head coach. But, the thing that Joe Brady, the reputation here was that he hated recruiting. And it's one of the reasons he wanted to go to the NFL. But, Zach, so much of recruiting now is done with a checkbook, man. Like, it's just not the same that it used to be. And especially when you have, like we talked about, the structure with a general manager and sort of a front office, it does more resemble an NFL. So I think 4 years ago, no way. Yeah. Now, I think there's the chance with the right job, the right situation, and the right resources with the right staff that Joe Brady would come back to college to be a head coach.
And that's just it. I've talked about this with Brian Hartline. Final thought before we pivot to Penn State versus LSU, actually comparing the jobs, because I think they're both top 10 jobs, but we'll get to that in just a moment. Joe Brady with Brian Hartline, same thing, no head coaching experience. Just build the staff around him. You can get all the analysts you want. You can get the right assistants. You can get the guys behind the scenes to manage all those things, NIL, recruiting. Where his areas of weakness, just supplement them through other people.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And especially now where analysts can coach on the field, that's never been easier. Like LSU hired Tim Rattay, who's an NFL quarterback, as an offensive analyst to work with the quarterbacks. Well, Joe Sloan got fired, the offensive coordinator. So now Tim Rattay is just your quarterbacks coach who's already been working with quarterbacks. It used to be that analysts could only coach the coaches. It's just all the support staff. But it goes back to why both these jobs are intriguing for people. It's because you do have the financial and the resource buy-in to give a coach whatever resource he needs to win at the highest level. So I do think that would be appealing for Brady. But I tend to agree, Zach. I think Joe Brady would rather be an NFL head coach, and I think he will get nibbles in the head coach market after this year. But that's another thing, man. Let's say Buffalo plays to the Super Bowl or through the playoffs. It's the end of January. You've missed the December high school period, and you've missed the January transfer portal. Like, can you do both? Maybe if you have the right support staff, but that is a really, really tough ask, man.
Penn State, LSU are, fortunately for each respective program, able to offset that in some capacity because just of the name, the brand that they bring, the cachet. But which one's better, objectively speaking? Well, we're going to debate that here in this Locked On crossover coming up next. And this episode is brought to you by Mazda. Mazda crafts cars for those who do more than simply move. Mazda delivers confidence with every ride, with more IIH Top Safety Pick Plus awards than anyone else. From footwork to breathwork, athletes sweat all the details. Mazda brings this same intention to how we craft every model. You can feel the Japanese craftsmanship in every detail, from the metallic accents to available Napa leather upholstery. You can make everyday drives feel like anything but, from smooth handling to intuitive controls. And with all-wheel drive standard in every crossover SUV, you can drive with confidence through almost any season. Like our players, we sweat every detail, because when you make every move count, impossible becomes irrelevant. That's Mazda. Mazda, move and be moved. LSU versus Penn State. I think a lot of people in SEC country are saying, why are you even having this debate? It's LSU across the board. And when you look at the, total revenue, you can find the fiscal reports or the estimated value that has LSU over Penn State fairly routinely, I think, but it's still so close. I think LSU, the last time I checked, is 7th or 8th, and Penn State's 9th or 10th. Florida's in there as well. So there are three, depending on who you ask. It's really to each their own, because is it your preference to live in Louisiana, be near Baton Rouge, or is it your preference to be in central Pennsylvania, which is not appealing to a lot of people? I get that, but sometimes the scenery or the quietness, if you will, of central Pennsylvania versus more of the urbanized areas is going to be appealing to some. It's really dependent on the head coaching prospect. But when you actually look at the jobs themselves, I also think about this. Look, I know that LSU is in a different situation given, hiring a president, but if you're evaluating that from a job standpoint, I would find it very odd, very weird, or just unsettling for Penn State politicians to be so involved in the outlook of Penn State football.
Welcome to Louisiana, brother.
So yeah, change your ticket prices. We want this candidate, not that candidate. Do you really want people who have, sorry to be disrespectful, but no idea of what's going on, having influence over your football program from LSU standpoint? Again, unsettling for me if that were the regard at Penn State. And again, that really might be a turnoff to prospective candidates when they look at both of these jobs.
I think it's absolutely fair to ask the question, can you hire a head coach without that coach knowing who his athletic director will be? And can you hire an athletic director when that athletic director isn't going to have autonomy to make the head coaching hire? It's a weird situation, but that's also not new for Louisiana. Strange bedfellows. Mike, do you know the story? I don't want to bore you, but you know how Tiger Stadium got built in the 1920s? There's a governor here named Huey Long, and he got state funds to build dorms on the campus with a big field in the middle. And that's Tiger Stadium. That's how we got the stadium built. So Tiger Stadium were dorm rooms on LSU's campus for decades, from the 20s to like the 1980s. So if you go, there's all these windows on the outside of Tiger Stadium. Those are dorm room windows. So there have always been this weird political intermingling of, can you imagine living at Tiger Stadium? Like for 60 years, students lived at Tiger Stadium. But like, there's always been this weird political influence in Louisiana over LSU, which is the flagship. But the advantage that LSU brings, Zach, I always say this, the biggest advantage LSU has is the dirt. LSU is one of two power programs that are the only Power 5 in a talent-rich state. It's LSU, it's Ohio State. Those are the only two.
Yeah.
And man, like if you look at Louisiana just right now, I'm in Baton Rouge. The number one quarterback in the country for 2027 is Elijah Haven. He's at Dunham in Baton Rouge. Mm-hmm. You have a 5-star safety 5 minutes from LSU's campus at Catholic High. That's Blaine Bradford. You could drive down 50 minutes to New Orleans and throw a rock, and you hit players like Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson. Harlem Berry, who's the 5-star number 1 running back in the country, who's at LSU. You go west to Lafayette. That's where you find Malik Neighbors. Brian Thomas was 15 minutes from LSU's campus. Like, the talent in this state, just look on Sundays. I mean, everybody knows it. Derek Stingley played at the same school that Elijah Haven did. Dunham, 10 minutes from LSU's campus. It's an absurd amount of talent. And so many kids grow up genuflecting at the purple and gold altar, and they only want to play at LSU. So that is the inherent advantage any coach will always have at LSU. The disadvantage is that while LSU is not a poor athletic department, it's not a poverty program. There is not Texas oil money at LSU. And so sometimes there are complicating factors when it comes to finances. And generally they find a way, but it's not as cut and dried as like SMU saying, hey, ACC, don't worry about our TV money for a decade. Just let us in the league. We got it. And then a year in, boom, they're in the college football playoff because they're billionaires with open checkbooks. It's not like that here. So you have to rely on your built-in advantage of the dirt in Louisiana, because you look at all the championship teams that LSU has built, and has been built on the backs of players from Louisiana.
Yeah, you can succeed at both. And I think people look at Penn State, well, they'll never be in the same category as Ohio State. Yeah, but they're not that far away either. They're not so many tiers down. I look at Ohio State, I look at Texas, Notre Dame, Michigan, I think is that first tier of schools. But Penn State, LSU, Florida are in that category of, they're almost a 1B. They're not even that. They're both in the top 10, depending on where you look. But conservatively speaking, they're both top 15 jobs.
I would bump Florida down.
Okay.
One of the big things about Florida that's a misconception is historically, they've not had great success. They've had 2 periods of success, Steve Spurrier, Urban Meyer, when they've hit on generational coaches. But the thing about Florida is they are also in a state that gets poached routinely. And there's Florida, Florida State, Miami, all in that same state. And now UCF and USF are Power 4 schools as well. So it's a giant state with a ton of talent, but it gets diluted because of all the competition in that state. And so sometimes they do have to go out. And it's also true that, man, you look at Florida and they have just rolled through coaches that have had success. I mean, Jim McElwain won the SEC East each of his first 2 years, and the third year they fired him because they didn't like him. I mean, Dan Mullen had success, and it just blew up internally. It's just such a weird place where you wonder, will you actually get consistent support from the administrators and from the fans, which I think, look, I get all the reasons Florida is appealing, but I think there's a lot of negatives that work against Florida as well.
So many other layers that we could cover in this conversation, and it was a great one to be had that is certainly going to take a lot of twists and turns with who LSU is going to go after, who Penn State's going to go after in Florida. Really unprecedented times as far as how many top tier jobs. We don't even talk about, and I know it's a different conversation, Oklahoma State's available, Florida State could be available, Virginia Tech, like I said, unprecedented in these coaching searches. But we got to put a lid on this version of this conversation. He is Matt Moscona of Locked On LSU. My name is Zach Seyko, the host of Locked On Nittany Lions. If you want daily coverage around Penn State and LSU, subscribe to our respective YouTube channels and wherever you get your podcasts. Matt, thank you so much for the time, for the perspective. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure, Zach. Thanks.